Hi, I'm Marty Cohn, and welcome to Brattleboro Community Television Meet the Candidates 2022. This series affords you an opportunity to hear from folks running for elected office. Today, our guest is Rick Morton, who is running for Windham County State Senator. Welcome, Rick.
Glad to be here.
All right, so Rick, right off the bat, why do you want to be Windham County State Senator?
There's a couple of reasons, Marty. One of them has to do with the Article 22, which is coming before the voters this fall. But I think that's representative of a problem that we have in Montpelier. There's a supermajority there, and the result is that the legislature can basically do whatever they want, and even if there's a threat of a veto by the governor, they can essentially override that veto. I think that's a dangerous situation for any voter of any party. And I would really appeal to the voters of the Windham County to really think about what we're doing when we send a senator to Montpelier. I feel that the legislature's a runaway train. It's off the rails, and they need a little bit of contrasting point of view. Not to be just obstructionist, but to be cooperative, but also give the governor a realistic opportunity to exercise a veto that could be sustained. And what does that do? It causes all of the legislators to think together, to work together, to be in harmony with one another, so that they pay attention to all the various concerns expressed by all the parties. And so I would like to represent the Republican Party in that office.
All right. So what sets you apart from the other candidates running for state senate?
Well, I guess coming off of that previous comment, so far we've had representatives here in Windham County that are aligned with the Democratic Party. Jeanette White retired this year, a very fine lady. Becca Balin's going for an office at a federal level. And so there's no incumbents. What sets me apart is that I am actually a Republican candidate, and I bring a point of view that I think is important to be expressed. Just like I have a place at this table, I'd like to represent the Republican Party at the table of the legislature in Montpelier, in the various committee offices, and also the various deliberations they go through when they consider legislation.
All right. So if you're elected, what would be your top two priorities? Top two.
One of the things I would like to see happen is, and may sound a little surprising to some viewers, but the legislature, think about it, we have 150 legislators in the House and 30 legislators in the Senate. So we're sending 180 people with lots of ideas about how they can make life more complicated for the rest of Vermont. I say that tongue-in-cheek, but that's essentially what is happening, because every piece of legislation which is offered and passed is going to be a choice between a particular group of people on the one hand and another group of people or set of people on another hand. It's the legislator putting their thumb on the scale in favor of some group or some person or some agency or some other function of government. I think we need to think about that more carefully. And what I'd like to see is the legislative process actually be a little bit more careful and more deliberative. So Marty, here's an example. I have a sort of a list of things that I would like to ask about every piece of legislation. Now, some of this is already being done now, but I want to have a more comprehensive approach. Who prepared the legislation? Who wrote it? Who contributed to its preparation? In other words, is it an outside group or is it an actual legislator? What is the need? How has this situation been addressed historically? What community resources are there that are already in place? How effective are they? Let's evaluate that effectiveness and see what needs to change. What jurisdiction has the appropriate responsibility? And we could go through a whole series of others requirements, like what local government resources are providing relief now? they need to be enhanced? How can we do that? Is it legal? Is it constitutional? What are other states doing to address the same kind of an issue that we're considering? And what did they do, and how did it work out for them? I'd like that actually to be written out with some kind of an assessment, kind of a risk assessment of the legislation. What are we trying to accomplish? So in a way, this might slow down the process a little bit, but if we had these kinds of evaluations in place, things like what state resources would be needed, what are in place now, are there any hindrances to the use of those resources now that we could remove, and that sort of thing. This would give us a clearer picture of how the legislation might really affect Vermont. And then look for unintended consequences. And if we have all parties at the table, let's see what the outcome might be. If people from a different point of view say, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that possible consequence? And let's consider what might happen if we went in that direction.
All right, so let me throw out a couple of issues for you
Sure.
to ponder. All right, so one, let's talk about the rising costs of food, fuel, and other goods. What can we do in Montpelier to address that issue?
I think the best role of government is to basically get out of the way. I believe that the way this country works most effectively and efficiently is for the freedom of the individual to be as enhanced as possible. We're a constitutional republic. The founders of this country deliberately gave the citizen the greatest authority, responsibility, and latitude. That doesn't mean they have complete freedom to do whatever they want, because we need to have certain controls in place to conduct business properly. However, if government tries to step in with price controls or some kind of mandated solution to inflation, I think that's going to be a problem. We can't think of everything. The marketplace actually does a pretty good job. And when the demand goes up, the prices will go up. When the demand goes down, the prices will go down. So we need to be very careful about stepping in to the middle of the marketplace. Are there some things we can do around the edges? Probably, yes, there probably are. But one of the things we should consider is, what is the role of government regulation and rules and bureaucracy in causing the inflation, causing these high prices, causing the limited scope of housing and other issues that we're facing? What is the role of government actually making things a little more difficult? In a sense, you could say that what we're doing here is a long-term job interview over the course of these months. Do we want legislators, the 180 legislators, the 30 in the Senate, to approach the problem with a government fix? I think we need to be careful about that. Not necessarily reject it all, but I think we need to be very careful and maybe even skeptical that government can solve that particular problem of rising prices. But if we can reduce regulations, make it easier to start a business, to expand a business, to hire people, not to have to jump through quite as many hoops as we have currently, that might just speed things up in terms of lowering prices.
All right, so now next part of that would be, what about the housing crisis in Vermont? What would you do to ease that?
Well, the housing crisis that particular problem is a result of construction companies, owners of property, deciding that they're not going to build homes, not going to convert homes, not going to put them on the market or take them off the market. Why do people do that? Why would they decide not to invest, not to build, not to participate if there's a high demand? And there is a high demand. What keeps people out of the market? So, Marty, my thought would be, it's a kind of a Republican idea, if you will, that the least government is the best government. That doesn't mean there's no role for government. There definitely is. But the least possible interference can open up possibilities for people to step up and say, look, I'm going to put my I'm going to convert this farmhouse that I just got, and we'll put a room on the side, or convert a room, or we'll do some building of units here and there where it's needed for student housing or elder housing or some other kind of housing. And let's get government out of the way. Eliminate regulations? No, but make them smart, make them simple, and not so lengthy to get the process complete. Right now, it can take months and even years to just go through the basic steps of getting approvals and permits.
All right, now let's shift to public safety. Does the state Senate have a role in enhancing public safety and reducing violence in Vermont?
I think there is definitely a role. Again, that role needs to be thoughtful and very carefully applied. We need to consult. This is what the committees would do. The relevant committees in the Senate would have people come in, state police and other agencies and authorities, and ask them for their advice about handling this issue. And that's appropriate role for the Senate, for the House for that matter, and get all parties to the table so we can hear from various vantage points. I am for funding the first responders of all kinds, making sure that they have the resources they need, and to do so to such an extent that they can staff up instead of having gaps in their staffing. Right now, I understand that there's some shortfalls in terms of staffing in the various towns and communities throughout Vermont, and I think that's a problem. I think, how do you solve that? Well, you may have to change your benefits and your salary structure. That's not going to solve everything, but we also have to have an environment that's welcoming and supportive, and I think that's the role that government can have, is to have that oversight and that influence.
All right, so the climate crisis, that's something that's continuing to reshape life here in Vermont. The legislature passed some legislation back in December of 2021. We had the Climate Action Plan issued. That's a blueprint for climate action. What pieces of the Climate Action Plan would you take up if elected?
I think the legislature has overstepped itself in many regards. The climate is something that we're all concerned about, but it's gotten kind of political. And I think, just as an example, and when I started speaking with you, Marty, we talked about the overreach of the legislature. The Clean Heat Standard is an example of that overreach. The intention of that particular legislation was to force the price of fossil fuels of all kinds through the roof, and to cause people who have homes heated with fossil fuels to consider other forms to switch to. But that's putting a burden on the lower income people and the middle income people to make an investment in changing their heating source when they're not really in a good position to do that, with prices going up all over the state for other things as well. So I think I'm glad it was defeated. Actually, it wasn't defeated. It passed the legislature, but then it was vetoed. And it was hanging in the balance whether that veto would be sustained. It was sustained because a couple of Democrats sided with the Republicans. And the result was the legislation the veto was sustained. I think that was ill-advised legislation, and I think that's an example of the overreach in a legislature that's off the rails. If you're a Democrat, if you're an independent, if you're progressive or Republican in Windham County, then I think it's important to think, what message are we sending to the legislature? If you elect a couple of more Democrats, they're going to be rookies, and they're going to get steamrolled by the leadership up there, and they'll just go along casting their vote like they're basically instructed to do. If there's an independent, they are going to caucus with either the Democrats or the Republicans. That's usually how that works. And if they don't, they're going to be standing alone, basically isolated voice and a low impact. But if they if they caucus with the Democrats, they'll wind up in the same boat we were in before. We need to send a new message. And so that's why I'm running, among other things. And therefore, I think we need to handle that climate crisis by thoughtful, careful deliberation and looking for the consequences on the voters.
All right, so last question. This is a tough one now. What do you want voters to know about you?
Well, my theme for my campaign is integrity, compassion, posterity. If you were to look at what that really represents, integrity has to do with what have I brought to the table? What is my past? What is my history? I've been an assistant vice president in a local community bank. I've been involved in the community for a number of years in a variety of boards and other service roles. I'm currently a chaplain down at an assisted living facility nearby. I'm an ordained minister, so that's something people might not know. And I bring that heart of compassion of a minister to the role of being legislator. But I'm thinking not just now, but also for posterity, and that's the future. So those are the three areas I would focus on and mention.
All right, well, Rick Morton, Republican candidate for Windham County State Senator. Thanks for being on the show.
You're welcome.
You can learn more by visiting Rick's campaign website, www.mortonforvermontsenate.com, and that's the number 4, VTSenate.com. The general election is Tuesday, November 8th. Remember, you can vote early in person, you can vote absentee by mail, or you can vote absentee and hand-delivered on Election Day. Whichever way works for you, please vote. Thanks for watching Meet the Candidates 2022. I'm Marty Cohn. Stay healthy.